Good evening, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again to Cambodia Global Dialogue of Southeast Asia TV. Tonight we'll be talking about something that not easy to understand for private sector. We talk about public-private sector partnership. Most of the time we know when the government is building the road, and most of the time we know when the private sector is doing some contract farming. But at times there are some, coming together of different partners. So I thought today we have Visal from UNDP, New York. Thanks for squeezing your time while in Phnom Penh. And David, you're pretty much a regular already since I started the show 2012. I think this is probably your end time already, right?
Well, I lost count.
You lost count, yeah. So whenever I'm short of a very vocal private sector, I bring David. But let just for the benefit of the audience, I give you a few minutes each to introduce yourself. Yeah, David, let's start with David.
Well, as usual, I'm specialized in government relation advisory services to multinational. But also for the past 1-2 years, I've been focusing more on building this public-private partnership for my clients, mainly.
Visal?
Good evening, Siphana. Thank you again for inviting me and us, I guess, for this show. And always a pleasure to be here and to also be able to explain and also to brief a bit on what UNDP has been doing in Cambodia. So yeah, my name is Visal. I'm a policy advisor for UNDP Cambodia.
But you're based in New York?
I'm based in New York.
All right. How often you swing by to Cambodia?
Well, it depends on the, maybe every 2 months, month and a half. I try
Okay.
to,
All right. Well, it's good. I mean, you're Cambodian, so you understand a lot of the dynamics here, which is quite important in a country like Cambodia who have gone through different development stage, not as obvious as in other countries who didn't have to go through what we went through. But I would say the Cambodia, we sort of reach a stage where we have graduated from a low-income country, we move up to a low-middle-income country, and we have ambition, and it's already in the, I would say, policy statement really that we aim to become a middle-income country by 2030. So development pattern will change. The rise of private sector is quite important. There's only so much a country like Cambodia can finance its project. So what motivates UNDP to step into this field of private sector world?
While the ODA, the Official Development Assistance, remains the main funding source of development in Cambodia, what we have been seeing is that there's a very dynamic new actors coming into this sector. The development finance institutions, the private foundations, impact investors. So there's a new bench of guys actually who express an interest in terms of financing development. So in that sense, obviously, it creates and opens new opportunities.
Okay.
And UNDP has been the forefront runner, I guess, in trying to adapt the approach in the way of doing business and try to move from funding development towards more financing development.
What's the difference, funding and financing?
The idea is really to attract private capital.
Okay.
As we know that in order to achieve the SDGs, there's roughly between $5 to $7 trillion annually. So at the end of the day, somebody has to pay the bill.
Okay.
Right? And so we see the emergence of those new actors as a new source of financing.
Okay.
And indeed, public-private partnership is definitely one of those models that we are looking at. But beside the model is also the mindset. I think it's really important to also raise this point because, traditional ODA, traditional organizations have their own path of doing business. So they need to change the mindset of the people and try to capture those opportunities and to transform them. And I believe that Cambodia is a very fertile soil because indeed, as you said, the country is moving very fast. And we can see a lot of investment coming to the country. Now the real challenge is how do we turn those investments into more productive, productive labor, respecting the rules of law, social impact, environmental impact, and And we've seen that what's going on in Seatv right now, and I think that those are the wake-up call, I guess, on how we can turn this investment to much more sustainable.
Yeah. David, I mean, we talk about public-private sector partnership, but the last several years, I think it is the World Economic Forum who sort of coined it a different angle more from the financing side of it, which is the blended financing, right? That's pretty much their coining the word.
Well, blended finance translates into simply merging public money with private money in order, like Visal said, to fund or finance a particular project for the commonality of sustainability in development in Cambodia, for instance.
Yes.
But public-private partnership may sound relatively sexy, but it is also a challenge to, in fact, mount each and every single public-private partnership project.
But that concept is not novel, huh?
I mean, I think
it's
not
not
novel.
novel.
It's you know what happened in Paris, the Notre Dame burned out.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And I think that I like to call that example that the cathedrals in Europe and France were actually one of the first public-private partnership.
You're kidding me?
And then of blended finance, because you got obviously the kings,
at the time,
the church, and the bourgeois, who actually pulled together funds in order to raise and to build those cathedrals, which actually bring different interests. Obviously the church, because there were citations.
Yes.
But we all know that those cathedrals were also some kind of fair markets. There's a market. People were talking about business.
Yes.
So each city in France, for example, was racing to get the most beautiful cathedrals. So yeah, the public-private partnership models and the blended finance is actually very old in terms of concepts. So it's right to see how we can adapt
Interesting.
to the new environment.
Interesting.
In the 21st century.
Wow. So in those days they had that, but they didn't know how to coin it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's quite interesting. But David, you've been working all your life, working with private sector, but mostly with the multinational. How do you get to this point where you thought of convincing the UN system in this to bring UNDP into the picture? What was the triggering? You woke up in the morning and say, "I have an idea."
That's basically that.
Well, honestly, it boils down to what Visal just described, right? UNDP having a new modus operandi now in terms of sustainability to try and pick up other funding channel, other financing channel. And so they tap into the private sector. And since I service a lot of multinational as client, so that's why I start to think through the whole process. Public-private partnership is, like I said, it's rather a challenge because it's tripartite. You have donors, development partners at UNDP, you have government, high ministries, and you have the private sector, the firms. So every single party has different agenda.
Yes.
But above all, they also have different language. So as a private sector company, most of the time they just do not understand what these people from the development world is talking about because they use certain terminology, which to the private sector they are not used to that. Government line ministry also have different sometimes language because everybody is politician, let's say, also have different agenda. But then the trick is to how can we then bridge the gap in acting as interpreter, in translating what UNDP has to say, the kind of vision and agenda, translating what the government or certain ministers may have in their mind, how they want the ministry to perform, which direction should they be leading the ministry in terms of their own portfolio, and especially from the private sector standpoint, the firms, they are only interested in dollars and cents.
Makes sense.
So how do we then find a commonality between these three parties to reach a converging point whereby everybody agree to do something for the good of society in a more sustainable way and everybody contribute its part.
Theoretically it sounds great. I mean, and that's why I'm saying this PPP is not novel, but many times it's so much in the air. Now, would you just talk to me? You talk more like a development guy now. Say now so if I'm a local people, I say, okay, well, give me a good example. How that thing work. Because for sure the private sectors many times they're after profit.
Yes.
Look, I have an employee to pay. I want to bring some revenue. I have the expense to pay, whatever, right? The government, I think a country like Cambodia, we're more thinking about delivering infrastructure service, to the public.
Right.
And development agency, you have the world to worry about. SDG, so many trillion of resource. But for the common man, give me a good example that you've been working on.
Because I have the luck, right? To have worked in both private sector and in both development side, but also through these 2 decades, I also work a lot with key ministries, so I understand each and every single party kind of mentality, the kind of thinking, the rationale behind why they are taking certain action. So take the example of the very first public-private partnership project that I did for the client, Grab. Grab, they're in the ride-hailing business. But Grab also has access to a lot of what we call big data.
Okay.
And the idea is to how can we then convince Grab to do a public-private partnership with UNDP and with the Ministry of Public Works and Transport in order for them to position the brand in the Cambodian market, to do something that rise above the competitors.
Okay, now I'm going to stop you there, but I will turn to Visal because now I can see from Grab perspective. I'm a private sector, I have big data, but why is UNDP is keen? Because you're in development, you're SDG, there's one. What's in it with a taxi, what you call it?
Ride-hailing.
Ride-hailing thing. What? I mean, it's hard to connect. One so macro, one so micro.
Well, as you said, private sector, they're only, as Milton Friedman was saying, the only social responsibility of a private is to make money. Okay.
Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that. And it's actually extremely important because that's how you create jobs and employment. But it doesn't mean that it's exclusive to all those impacts. So the idea for UNDP, for example, to partner with Grab was indeed to realize that Phnom Penh is facing a lot of issues in terms of congestions, traffic congestions, in terms of air quality due to the transport sectors, and also in terms of road safety. And we do understand, as a Prime Minister is also very keen in trying to make a lot of change in terms of road safety. And it's also one of the visions of Grab. So I think that's thanks to David, is we try to see, okay, this is what Grab business is all about, and this is what UNDP can do in order to actually facilitate these transitions in terms of road safety, in terms of traffic congestions. And when we develop basically a value proposition, where both parties, and 3 parties, the Ministry of Transport, can see a concrete impact, give you a concrete impact.
Okay.
See, for example, it costs more or less $13 million a year in terms of traffic congestions, and gas, and you being late for your work or being late for the school. So there's a huge cost due to traffic congestions. So trying to understand what are the causes of the traffic congestions, to understand actually how can we actually address that, we'll obviously try enable the government to reduce this cost. And then maybe to use that cost to invest into all those services like subway, like the tramway, like the SkyTrain, whatever the Ministry of Transport actually is planning. So that's how we can actually enforce changes into the cities. But road safety is also extremely important, So that's why we also partner with the Ministry of Transport and Grab to do some campaign, and also to understand what are those black spots in the cities, why accidents happen. Is it because someone is drunk, someone didn't follow the rules? So it's trying to understand actually how we can change behavior. And also try to understand what would be the needed investments from the public to change the pattern. So those are the concrete impact that we have.
I will stop you now because we need to take a short break.
Sure.
But when I come back, I want to shift back to David, more from the Ministry of Public Work and Transport. How do they see solving a black spot? Okay. David, I mean, Visal mentioned about the black spot, which I haven't thought about that. I know accidents happen randomly, but from what you said, it's not random because there are some places it happen more than often. So how do you all convince the government that public-private sector partnership can help solve the issue of safety and black spot? I still cannot figure out yet.
Well, as you know, today in most ministries, there are still a certain deficit in resources.
Yes.
Like because of budget constraint and so forth. So, Ministry of Transport is not an exception. So what we have thought through the process of the project conceptualization is, why don't we use the big data that Grab does have in all their markets, the experience that they have in all those markets where they actually tap into the big data and cooperate with local government in order to train the local public institution, Ministry of Transport mainly in those countries, to how to analyze those big data and then make use of those big data for their traffic management policy. Same like all these black spots that you have all over the city or even throughout the country. Of course, from Ministry of Transport own perspective, they do not have the resources to go and track all this on a daily and regular basis. But this is where the project is calling upon certain other stakeholders that have developed very good application in terms of IT to help identify those accident prone.
So it starts with a policy, shaping first.
Correct.
In terms of the first benefit will be influencing the policy, the regulatory framework in that. But from UNDP as being a development agency, what is your value contribution, in this process, right?
So there's definitely different, actually, I would say, value added. Why actually the private sector should come and work with UNDP. First, most of those private sector we were talking, like Grab and others, have actually some strong commitment. It's not that they just
commitment
towards development, towards reducing poverty, road safety, and other things. So what we can bring to the table is really the knowledge and the long-standing experience that we have actually in Cambodia. But also in terms of measuring and reporting on the impact, because that's something that maybe the private sector doesn't know how to actually report on the impact that they have from their investments. So that's something that we bring to the table. The second aspect, which is I think more for Grab, is we try to help them also through our experience in terms of market access and positioning into the markets. So that's something through our network, through our obviously convening power with the governments. It's I think a strong asset. But also in terms of accessing to capital, because some of this company also required to scale their activities in Cambodia. So by partnering with UNDP, it's not only they understand that being associated with UNDP, they can actually approach new source of funding, new source of financing. That are not necessarily the traditional one, like DFIs and development bank, for example. So those are the new source of funding that the private sector can actually tap into
Yes.
in order to increase and scale their activities. So there's different ways, and I think that what I like to report is that it's not only about what UNDP can provide. So we have this report saying, private sector, this is what we can do for you. That's one thing, but I like to hear more from the public sector. What do, based on the experience that we have with Grab, with Alibaba for PX, with WorldBridge, all those new partners, what actually they see in the UNDP in terms of value added, and that's become basically our business model.
Okay.
Instead of preempting.
I just came back from the ASEAN summit with the Prime Minister, and last year Singapore come up with something that will be of great relevance: smart city, and now the smart city mindset is kicking in now. They have in all 10 ASEAN countries. In Cambodia we have 3 cities, but I think your initiative here definitely fit into the concept of smart city.
Exactly.
Well, it was designed primarily with that sort of objective in the long run.
Okay.
It's really to translate the smart city, because if you ask 10 people what smart city is all about, you can have 10 different definitions. That's not because you have a smart watch, become smart, right? So we try to adopt an approach where, let's tackle the urban transport first, how we can turn it more smart. As an entry point to address all the issues related to the urban development of the country. So instead of getting holistic in terms of big investments, let's try one path and see how we can actually make change through that. And then basically spread to all these issues.
Scale it up at the provincial level, that sort of thing, So this is quite interesting. You just mentioned now Alibaba, but there's also other field. Anything outside the capital city, anything in agriculture? Let's face it, gentlemen, Cambodia is an agrarian society.
Right.
Have you gentlemen worked in agriculture sector, for example?
Well, the agribusiness related PPP was the second one that we did with UNDP.
All right.
And that involved a company from Hong Kong, which is called Green Leader. And these guys, they are primarily the game changer to industrialize the cassava sector in the entire.
Explain me how it works.
As you know, Green Leader has committed to build a series of cassava starch and modified starch factories in Cambodia for the next 3 to 5 years down the road, right? So that is what I call a game changer to industrialize the whole cassava sector. They will be the one who actually comes in, put in the money for the processing plant, and then try to really cut out the traditional middleman who has been mainly exploiting our farmers. So therefore the farmers, through contract farming partnership with that particular company, through a PPP with UNDP, hand in hand with Ministry of Commerce and Ministry of Agriculture. So these stakeholders will then go all the way to do more capacity building in enhancing the effectiveness of all these farmers, cooperatives or communities.
So Visal, on this one, where is the value contribution of UNDP?
Here is really to
policy,
at the policy level, obviously, because that's something that we help the Ministry of Commerce to shape the cassava policy to national level, which is actually about to be endorsed by the governments. It's at the concerned ministers right now. It's really to secure the investment of Green Leader in Cambodia, because Cambodia still remains a little bit a pioneer market with a lot of risk. So in that sense, by working with Green Leader, we're trying to make sure that their investments actually are sustainable. So it's not that we try to organize, for example, the farmers associations, try to get them linking the producers with the transformations. That's where the value basically is. So we're creating that kind of ecosystem, connecting the dots along the value chains to make sure that their investments actually are productive. Because at the end of the day, they will still need to get sufficient quality supply of inputs, basically. The cassava. So in that sense, UNDP actually working more on the amont, so working with farmers,
upstream
level, making sure that the soil are not destroyed. That's so we actually adopting new practices in terms of farming systems. So all those things I think can be duplicated in other sectors as well.
So I think what UNDP is doing upstream is a lot about what you've been preaching around the world, which is sustainability, caring for the environment,
applying to a specific sector.
Yes, exactly.
Where you can see actually results at the farmer level.
Yes.
We can see actually their livelihood and their revenue increasing much more sustainable.
Yeah. Contract farming again has been there for a long time. But the way I see it, perhaps maybe with the UNDP contribution, the farmer will feel more secure, I guess.
And more confidence.
Isn't it?
More confidence.
Okay. Indeed. So you saw a seal of confidence.
Exactly.
Okay.
Indeed, that's exactly a good way to say it. It's a seal of confidence. But there's others areas. I mean, I want to talk about, for example, the partnership that we have with Alibaba.
Okay.
In a time where digitalizations, we live in a digital world, and the government of Cambodia is also very moving very fast in terms of how to digitalize the economy. And talking about digitalizations, we're talking about e-commerce. What the e-commerce law will be passed soon is how do we actually address the urban-rural dividends?
Okay.
You have a lot of young people who actually do e-commerce via Facebook, but they're mainly in the city. There are 6 million people actually on Facebook accounts right now in Cambodia who do transactions. But how can we actually benefit also the people in the rural area, who can actually take advantage of the opportunities that e-commerce can provide to them, that digitalizations provide to them. So that's also a partnership that we have with Alibaba 4PX, is trying to understand, for example, the Alibaba Tabao village in China that they did, where they actually turn overnight villages, rural area, into a digital world, and they've been able to export and to produce basically products and to sell it on e-markets. So that's one way also we're doing it with this project, is how we can benefit, how can we make this rural people benefiting from the e-commerce by creating some kind of provincial kiosk, for example, and helping actually those local entrepreneurs to market their products, for domestic market, but also maybe for cross-border trade. So we partner with the One Village, One Product, for example, initiatives, relying on existing network of kiosks. Like there's this NGO, Million Fontaine, who has more than 200 kiosks all around the country. Why don't we actually leverage on those kiosks?
So in other words, you really using technology to leverage. I would say technology is a great leveler. To really bring everybody, the big guy, the small guy, together, that sort of thing. But is Cambodia ready for e-commerce, David?
Well, look, we have a very young population that are IT savvy. To them, dealing with computers is actually comes relatively natural, so to speak. So why not then really tap into that huge potential of resources that we have in the country? But coming back to what Visal just said, bringing a giant like Alibaba 4PX into Cambodia is to also tap into their experience on how they have.
Because we're quite small in the Alibaba world.
But you have to look at it from different angle. If you just look at from
why they interested in a small market like Cambodia?
If you just look at the market size itself, yes, there's no interest for these giants. But if we know how to explain to them, like, okay, given the ecosystem that they managed to build in the rural Chinese area, can you then come and help replicate the same, rebuilding the same ecosystem on the Cambodian context?
It's also to use for them Cambodia as a hub. I mean, the idea is obviously not, Cambodian market is pretty small, but it's the ASEAN market. How do you actually penetrate the ASEAN markets? By using Cambodia as a hub. So that's actually, I guess, their ambition.
So I think I'm gonna have another break, but when we come back, I want to build upon what you just said, which is ASEAN. Cambodia is in ASEAN Economic Community. We're gonna have hopefully by the end this year, the conclusion of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership that will open up a wide spectrum of market for us. How do a small Cambodia, country like Cambodia, use technology, hang around with the big guy like Alibaba
Precisely.
to get there, right? All right. So one more break. Well, we were just talking about ASEAN, and Cambodia, as you know from WTO accession, from ASEAN integration, we believe, at least our leadership, like Prime Minister, he believed in globalization. He believed in opening up the country, and that's why we've been able to witness so much growth, mainly because of this market openness, right? But the fact remains that we're still a small base. 16 million, about 11 million working force. Market is still small, but we are right in the heart of the Mekong sub-region.
Precisely because of the very strategic geographical location itself. That's why we managed to build up a storyline whereby we convinced people like Alibaba, China, logistic based people to come and use Cambodia. Not only look at Cambodia as just a domestic market perspective, but look at Cambodia more as a springing board.
Do they find that good local people that can work with them?
Yes. I think we have identified so far some pretty good, strong local partners. Build up a very strong relationship with relevant ministries, and tap into the existing infrastructure that the local partner do have in country, and we can start building up from there. And then as time goes on, in a couple of years down the road, then scale it up. So the idea first is to use Cambodia as a regional hub to bring in all these Alibaba e-commerce traffic volume into Cambodia. Put it in some sort of bonded facilities, and then consolidate, and then redispatch from there to the neighboring countries.
At the summit, our Prime Minister mentioned one interesting thing which we think it makes a lot of sense, and we have to work on that, is that intra-trade within ASEAN is still very low in relative term as compared to the European Union, for example. They exceed 50% already. We're still in early 20, low 20. And to me, being in the sub-region, Mekong sub-region is one, being in ASEAN is one, it's still 650 million people. If we can have this mechanism, this platform, this digital thing, we can skip the learning curve.
Exactly. But you still need, I guess, as you mentioned, the skills of our retailers and SMEs to really, transform the opportunities that ASEAN market is, and particularly through e-commerce. How do we actually reinforce the capacity of our SMEs to be ready to move into the digital world and to be able to grab those opportunities that the ASEAN market is providing to them? So that's extremely important. It's also want to understand the risk, because it's not only about the opportunities, it's also the risk that e-commerce can actually bring to Cambodia. In New York, for example, you have streets but empty of retail. There's no more retail shops. You only have nail polish, haircuts, Dunkin' Donuts.
The thing that you cannot do online.
Exactly. And so you cannot put your fingers yet on your iPhone to get your nail polish, but So
that could be a source of innovation.
So it's also to understand, to help our SMEs to understand the stake.
So they all go online?
They go online. There's no more bookstore, for example. You buy it online now. So Cambodia is not yet there, but it's also to understand those risks. So the skills are extremely important. In order to tap the ASEAN market, is also how do we link to the regional value chains. And we've been talking a lot about how Cambodia can penetrate and integrate those value chains. here I want to bring this example, this partnership we have with Woodbridge.
Okay.
With,
A local gentleman.
a local gentleman, where we understand that there's a need to develop the production and transformation capacity. Looking at innovative sectors like biotechnology, like agro-industry, for example, and bringing basically the SMEs that are involved in those sectors, linking with big investors, giant like Sunkist and all those investors who want to come to Cambodia, and basically providing them with the skills, but also the technologies that actually will be required for them to link to those value chains in order to grab the opportunities that the ASEAN is bringing to Cambodia.
Yeah, well, again, I because I do follow a lot of policy, as a directive that our Prime Minister has been pushing. And as you know, the last several years, the World Economic Forum has been very much, in the region, in terms of pushing the Fourth Industrial Revolution. In Thailand, they have the Industry 4.0. Wherever we go, we hear this 4.0 thing. I'm not sure people understand the same thing, right? But whatever we understand, you need to have people who can do the work.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And in this partnership that you're working with the Woodbridge, this local company, how do you see, and how long do you think it will take to build the capacity of Cambodian to really get into this, supply chain?
I think it's a long run, but I guess the idea is we're trying to tap into those what we call low-hanging fruits, or quick wins, to demonstrate that the model actually is viable. And that's the role of UNDP.
Yes.
We cannot obviously invest into the SME cluster park.
Yes.
That's something that private investment and also government should join hands. Our role is really to demonstrate that it is viable, in terms of investment point of view, but also has some concrete impact in terms of skills development, in terms of impact on environment, by adopting new technologies. So that's basically what UNDP is.
But what you try to push in is that the scalability is that scalable?
Yeah. Okay. We have to demonstrate that it is scalable. And then the government is finalizing the public-private partnership law, for example, which is an important piece in the regulatory framework to actually promote this kind of initiatives. It's really trying to demonstrate that.
With that framework, will there be entry barrier or no barrier for other Cambodians who want to enter into the sector?
Well, it's definitely an inclusive approach.
Inclusive approach, yes.
So it's to demonstrate with one partner, but it's also then to scale it to others. So that's really the idea behind this partnership. It's really to demonstrate that. And also to demonstrate to the government that if you put $1 from the national budget in supporting those kind of sustainable SME park, this is the return on investment that you get.
Yes.
Not only in terms of tax or in terms of benefit to the people, but in terms of attracting further investments.
Yeah, I think I want to shift to David. A country like Cambodia, for so many decades post-war, we've been so much relying on labor-intensive industry, footwear, garment. I think it's about time we have this pressure for example, from the EBA, for example, pressure that, because EBA main impact will be on labor-intensive industry. But to be able to shift, or at least diversify gradually into high-tech, where it's really natural for young Cambodian who keep playing with these, tools there. I want to call it tools, It makes sense, but it required some role modeling. It required some, I would say, confidence building. It required some leadership, policy leadership on that side. Do you see that?
Sure, as you know, because of the pressure from EBA, we need to do anything we could today to enhance as quick as possible our competitiveness.
Yes.
And it boils down to mainly deficit in skilled manpower, deficit in infrastructure, but there's also a certain way where you can use technology to really leapfrog the process. the SME cluster of verbiage is maybe one of the channel where we can do that, because it cater to also what you call Industry 4.0, whereby we're going to have a component to provide educational content to train and build capacity of the local SMEs that we have here to up to the level of 4.0 platform.
Okay.
But why this local group is also looking into this partnership with UNDP is, like I said, how do we define commonality and converge all the interests that may be different, but we converge the interests from all these three stakeholders: government, donors, and private sector.
Yes.
So the government has definitely come up with very strong incentive for SMEs in terms of policy. That is one part. UNP comes in with the sort of blue flag credentials, meaning that that particular project from that particular company has ticked all the boxes in terms of compliance for norms, SDG, and so forth. That company itself would then primarily piggyback on the endorsement from both the UNDP and from the government in terms of backup with the proper SME tax incentive to then go and leverage all this for fundraising to attract further investment into the park.
Visal, it's clear, I mean, from the UN perspective, from where you're coming from, New York, which is the SDG, but Thailand this year is the chair ASEAN, and they are pushing very, very strong on the synergy with what we call the Complementarity Initiative, which is complementing, the SDG with the regional initiative like this could be a perfect example on complementarity, how you can raise additional resource mobilization at its best, but to support a policy, imperative, not just of a country like Cambodia, of the region, of the world. So this is quite a novel, but I say rebranding, rebranding, make it localized, make people feel part of it. But the thing that I would want to say that it get me excited is that this sort of initiative, you've been able to bring a global initiative. You're dealing with multinational who think Cambodia is so tiny, that under normal circumstances they wouldn't even bother, right? Why should they bother coming to a 16 million market size as compared to 96 million next door? But because of that concept, we've been able to capture, and again, Visal, like you say, if we're able to build the resource to capitalize on that, we could ride a train of innovation.
I think the key point is convince all these big companies, this multinational, not to look at Cambodia as just Cambodia market itself, because of the sheer small size, but is to look at Cambodia as a springboard
or part of the regional supply chain.
That's the key word.
All right, gentlemen, we're coming to the end of the show, and 45 minutes is not enough for a topic covering a global UN issue down to cassava. I think it's a bit stretching, to bring the partnership. But we've been able to demonstrate that it's possible.
Right.
So anyway, I'll give you a minute. What's the message you want the audience to remember from our talk?
I think, like I said, is how do we then learn to be a intermediary or bridging the gap between all these different stakeholders that have different perspectives in their own right. How do we then define certain commonality between them in order to be more sustainable in the long run and have all this translated on the field into some real tangible results at the end of the day.
Visal?
Yeah, as I said, the private sector brings new ideas, new expertise, and along the way, finance. So I think that the opportunity that Cambodia and UNDP actually, in that sense, is really trying to scale and to turn those opportunities in real terms. And indeed, it's sometimes difficult to understand all those global agenda, but when we come to at the level of a project, and that's where we can see actually the advantage of those kind of new models. So private sector is definitely a new actor in terms of financing development. Now is actually how we build the case and demonstrate that Cambodia is the right place where you can actually start to develop the country. So in that sense, UNDP played that facilitating role because at the end of the day, we cannot wait for development to come. We have to make it happen.
All right, great. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for sharing your perspective from private sector, from a UN body, and I think I like to consider myself as the Cambodian recipient. I think we're quite happy. So I'm not going to bother summarizing. I think the discussion is quite rich. But all I can say is that the main message I want to leave behind is that be innovative. There's a lot of old stuff that exists already in the past. But how do you revitalize, how you innovate this old notion in the context of a country like Cambodia where we're not like other countries. We went through difficult years. We have a resurgence, we have an emergence, it's like a phoenix rising from the ashes. Everything is possible. We have a leadership that are very open-minded, pro-market openness, pro-globalization, pro-regionalization. So these are the, I would say, the key parameter of success. And after that, reach out to partner, reach out to the UN, reach out to the private sector, reach out to the philanthropists, and reach out to your own people because they are ultimately the source of the productivity. So on that note, good night and see you next time. Well, David, thank you so much for coming. Visal, thanks for coming on a short notice. But I think what I try to, I would say, leave behind from this discussion is that for a country like Cambodia where we have gone through so much difficult phase of development, starting from zero base, now we're catching up. Let's make sure we use technology, in our advantage. Let's make sure that we're innovative enough to look at old business model that may not work in the past because it was too novel. How do we, reach out to partnership, like the UN system, for example, like the multinational, like the private sector, domestically, and then form a sort of public-private sector partnership, to think of ways, whether in agriculture sector, whether in technology, whether in transport, logistics. I think the sky is the limit. So I think I want to wrap up by saying, be innovative, and then hopefully we can catch up with the rest of the world in a much shorter time, had we not do that. So good night.